or in some type of role and you're working with a program, how would you help them shape this? Does anyone want to share out about some of their discussion?
Well, so this kind of just pertains to the first part, the child health promotion as the category. Is this category under, say, like the learning environment, or are we doing it under like child health as the actual?
So the playground inspection, for those of you who are quite familiar with the point structure guide, lives under child health. Enhancements to your outdoor learning environment, I think you could put tied to either goal, either standard. It could be learning environment. In this case, they put it here because they linked it to that having the playground inspection.
Okay.
Okay.
So we talked about this goal being a specific timeline, especially based on the first part where they say it's on based on a safety audit. So they would really need a timeline to know by this date, this is when we're going to have this completed, as well as for the status and priority. We would say this is definitely a high priority goal that needs to be accomplished.
I'm not a QI navigator, first and foremost, but I just feel like there appears to be too much in this one sentence. They're talking about maintaining the fence, making repairs to the fence, and then replacing the fence, and I think that's hard to associate a deadline to. So to me, it almost, I don't know how this is set up, if you can separate it into different sentences, but it seems like there's too much in one sentence for me.
Does anyone else want to chime in the back?
So that was kind of what we were thinking first too, is it almost seems like there's like 3 goals here. So you could even separate it into creating a checklist for maintaining and just making sure that it's safety, and then putting a reporting and keeping it in place for maintaining and replacing or repairing. And then for the last one, we really wanted to talk about maybe putting some steps of researching materials and if this would be cost effective, which materials would be appropriate for us or what would work well for our standards, and then a purchasing by this deadline date.
Thank you. Anyone else? Debbie?
But it also doesn't indicate who's responsible. Is there a particular person that's going to take on this project, or who's going to do it?
Great, so that accountability is really important, that timeliness, measuring the progress, who's accountable, who's responsible for the work. But you can see, as we talked about some of the enhancements to this goal, it lends itself really nicely to being able to use it to spend QI dollars to make these improvements. The underlying goal here of improving a safety issue for children is really good. But to take it to that next step of actually having action on it, it needs a few more details. So thank you everyone for chiming in, participating in that. So here's a list with a few ideas for spending. Classroom enhancements are always a good place to start, and using things like licensing reports, ERS tools, as I mentioned before. Thinking about bigger ticket items like furniture. When you think about a grant, they may not always be around, so those items are a good idea. Investments in staff, so training and college coursework, conferences, all of that is going to be a really sustainable investment in the long term. Other programmatic implementations, things like implementing a child assessment system, adopting a new curriculum, making some changes that incur cost, upfront cost. your QI dollars are a good way to make those changes happen. And then some other ideas could be additional coaching, so coaching reimbursement, contracting with an organization for additional ratings or observations or inspections, screenings, capital improvement activities, and other things. We've gotten in Denver, a lot of our ideas from programs themselves who just ask, do you think this is allowable? And it leads to a conversation. Well, let me ask our program officer and we'll get back to you. And sure enough, it sort of snowballs into other programs being interested in the idea and thinking more broadly and outside the box with our dollars. All right, I'm going to hand things over to Lelania next. She is going to walk us through with some screenshots exactly what it looks like for a program to submit an order through that EC Connect portal. And then what it looks like when we're sitting in the Denver office when that order comes in and how we would process it and move it through the different steps.
Yes. Okay, so this is the view from EC Connect once you have logged in, either on behalf of your provider or as a provider. The only difference that you're seeing that your provider would not see is this orange button here. This is something that is only visible to navigators, people with sugar access, so that you can enter an order. So you had to place an order before it was able to get into sugar for some reason. This way you can still get it into sugar, but if you click that button, what will happen is it will not go through the normal channels. It won't go to the vendor if you have a lakeshore order, for example. So that's something that can be very helpful. So on this page, we're going to begin by selecting our funding stream here. And then we would open a new QI request. Okay, so here we want to make sure that we have the correct goal category. And we're going to want this to match our QIP goal because once that's selected, the QIP goals that fall within that category are going to be available for you to choose once you start entering items. So if you choose the wrong QIP goal category, you won't be able to see the right goals when you get to that place when you have to start entering your goals. Yes.
So since, as a coach, I can't see this, it'd be nice if I knew what those goal categories were so I could help the site pick the right ones, because I can't see what I want.
That's true. Where can we see that?
Thank you. Coaches can log into Connect and see this on behalf of their sites as long as you're the lead coach.
So if I click on that site, I can?
That's correct. And the QIP goal categories are the color to shines categories.
Yeah, okay.
So
And
that's
it's
all.
on the first page.
Yep. and it's
When you open up ECC Connect, their
on the
QIP
dashboard
goals
page. You're
show
right.
right up there.
Yay. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is decide who we are spending money with. If we are doing a reimbursement, then we would select pay site. But if we are using a vendor, we're going to hopefully choose an approved vendor, and at which point we have a drop down there that has 20 plus vendors that we are working directly with. Select that vendor, and then you come over here and you select learning materials. Yes.
I just wonder if you could talk about what to do if they're not an approved vendor, just to make sure.
Yes, I will definitely get to that. Okay. So once we get, so as you may know, we have a couple of vendors that we have portals with, and it would go directly into those websites. But if you do choose one that doesn't have a punch-out portal with us, you'll see these fields here where you'll be entering one by one the items that they would like to order. The required fields here that you won't be able to submit this order without those fields being selected will be your QIP goal, your age appropriate level, and your classroom. If you get to the end of your order and any of those fields are missing, you'll see an error. Now, if you do choose Lakeshore or Kaplan, we have a very special relationship with them. They created this portal inside EC Connect for our providers to take them directly to the website, which is really wonderful because they can see all of the different things they can buy there and use it as use the cart there. So they would select their items one by one and go ahead and add them to their cart. And as you'll see here, the discount is already applied. So once you get to the cart, you'll be able to see what the price that they're paying is. And that can be substantially lower with Kaplan. Once they're ready and they have all of the items they'd like to purchase, they go ahead and click place order, at which point it returns them to EC Connect. They are not finished. Sometimes you'll find that a provider will click that and they'll think they're done and then they'll wonder what happened to their order. They have to press this button that says review purchase, and once they do that, everything loads into EC Connect, and one by one they'll still have to fill out those required fields that we saw on that other page. Are there any questions about the portal?
You can't do that as a back entry though, can you?
What do you mean?
Not on our
Bill
side,
says
though.
no.
And you can't because then it will order it again. So that's
And so that's why we use that orange button that we talked about before, if you need to do something in the back end without having it reordered. This is the request to use another vendor. Sometimes sites want something that is not available from one of our vendors, and so we do have that option. It's not necessarily a guarantee that just because they select request to use other vendor, that is up to the council whether or not they want to make that purchase. They select payable to here, request other vendor, and then in the special instructions, we want all of the information that we will need to make that purchase on their behalf. And then after that, it just goes on the same way. You're going to click learning materials, and from there, enter all the items. Capital improvements. This one can be confusing. Capital improvements can only be purchased with ITQA and CCAP funds. What we find is providers most often would like to have 50% of that cost paid down ahead of time. In order to do that, they select initial deposit requested by vendor. The other option, of course, is to be reimbursed by for the total after it's complete. But we find this is the one that they use most often. They have to reply yes to these questions. And then the requirements are they must have 3 bids for capital improvements. There are some exceptions. For example, you don't need 3 bids for mulch. I got you. Oh, were you just stretching?
Yes, I did.
No worries. Anyone else? Sorry.
You said that capital improvements can only be done under ITQA and CCAP.
Yes.
Okay, so help me understand some of the documents that we received that said capital improvements to meet health and safety requirements considered on a case-by-case basis. So that makes me believe that possibly it's covered as well as on this other form.
Yes, I believe that is true, that there are some occasional exceptions to that rule. Is that right, Sharon?
It depends on the funding stream, and you must always get prior pre-approval for capital improvements from your program officer.
No matter the funding stream, so even inclusive of these two, these
I
prior
think for
approval?
ITQ and CCAP, there's like a threshold. Yeah. So, Kelly, do you know what the threshold is?
Is it the 2,500 special request?
So, but in any case, if you're ever unsure, the best thing to do is to email your program officer and have them email you back so you have it in writing if it's approved or not approved.
And I believe that we made those exceptions only when it was a licensing issue, so specifically due to licensing, and they would have to show us their licensing documentation.
Under these two?
Yes, I mean, under the other, under the non-ITQA or CCAP options.
And can anyone tell the difference between, what's different about ITQA and CCAP versus school readiness and systems building? What's the source of the funds? State general funds. So these are governed by legislation. So you want to look at the originating legislation for allowable costs. For the CCDF funds that are federal, you want to look at the CCDF regulations. And
You want us to go look at regulations?
as someone administering grants, you should
We
be.
should look that up and not have guidance from, but shouldn't there be just general rules?
Well,
If
of
it's
course.
this funding stream, then-
Sure, yeah, I think it's both. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I think, so when we're talking about capital improvements and ITQA and CCAP, what Sharon's saying is right. You guys want to know where your funding stream comes from, especially because we're all impacted by the state legislature. So thinking about it from that perspective, I'm not encouraging you necessarily to go lobby unless that's something you're comfortable doing. But I do think what Sharon's talking about in terms of understanding your funding, understanding where it comes from, understanding why those rules are the way they are. So for example, you all know we can't buy food with Race to the Top funds. That is a federal requirement. So we're not expecting you all to become federal grants experts or state grant expert, but having an understanding of where the money is coming from and why it is that way. When we deal with federal funds especially, we're subject to the Office of Management and Budget super circular rules. So you guys got those questions around earlier this year around from our finance team around like how you do money. And that's not because we're trying to poke in and do stuff. It's because we are required by our federal partners to make sure that there's certain controls in place, right? And so by no means do we expect you to be the experts. We are all learning this together as well, but understanding when in doubt, you can always look to the legislation similar to like the rules around the councils that Stacey's been working on, right? Those are coming out of the legislation. And so it can give you some insight as to why things are the way they are, why some requirements might be what they are.
And as a good example, if you look at CCDF guidance, you might get some good ideas about possible activities. For example, CCDF actually allows you and encourages actual enhancements to salary and wages for teachers. None of us do that because there's a whole bunch of compliance requirements related to that. It's not something that's been encouraged at a state level. But if that's something you wanted to do, you could cite that and request permission to do that.
I appreciate the empowerment message, empower us to make those decisions. But I was just looking really more for straightforward guidance when documents that we've been handed, they need to match. I guess that's confusing to me. And
So-
I want to understand better.
Sorry, the documents that you were handed, those are kind of outdated also. So documents that we use just as examples as to things you can put together for your staff around the way that you prefer to have your funds spent.
Good to know.
And those
And
are
it's on the-
specific to Denver.
And so on the manager approval needed, just a clarification on that. Again, just understanding the funding streams of who has to approve that. So for an example, for substitute or some things like that, it says manager approval here in this particular example, but I understood that that needed to go to CHS.
So
For
special
some.
approval is something you set on the funding stream record, and we'll be going through that a little bit in a later session. Manager is no longer a term that's really used. We use grant lead, special approver, or program officer.
But council kind of in the council position, there could be something that are approved by that.
Yes, correct, and that's the special approver role.
Thank you.
Okay. The only other thing that we want to make sure that they have for their capital improvement request is they're doing the 50% down, we need before photos. And so the reason these are highlighted here on the bottom is because you cannot submit that record without all three of those pieces of information being uploaded. What we have found, if someone's trying to meet a deadline, they can go ahead and just upload something from their desktop, a blank piece of paper, if needed, just to get it submitted. And then they can send you that additional documentation that you can attach to the record later on. Any more questions about capital improvements? This is a coursework request. There's two different ways to do coursework requests. The provider can pay for that, pay for the coursework, and we can reimburse them. Or we can pay the college directly. In either situation, we need to have the registration and the statement from those classes attached at the bottom. Yes.
Do they need to complete the class in order to get reimbursed at a certain level?
We don't, yeah, that might be council specific because oftentimes we'll pay, like they may pay for it up front and we will, if they request the funds and it's been paid for and they can show proof that it's been paid for, we'll pay for it.
In Denver, we have a system where we do some random auditing of coursework to make sure that the class was A, attended, and then B, a certain level grade was earned at the end. But I think it varies. That was something we adopted in Denver, but I don't think it was a state rule that's applied to everyone. So councils may have some variation on that.
And I think, there is a statement in the request form itself that says that the council reserves the right to audit, so that any council could do that. So it's very clear to the provider.
Okay, so now we are in sugar. Something that you will notice, and it doesn't show it on this page, but at the very bottom, if you were submitting this on behalf of your provider, there is an option to view in sugar. So you click that button and you would be able to see the record of the request that was just placed. Here, I just highlighted a couple things that you want to make sure that you're looking at as you're placing an order quality control. As far as Denver is concerned, we do not purchase consumable items. So when we would see crayons, we would delete that and let the provider know that we were unable to purchase those items for them. Also, if this, for example, was the ITQA grant, right here is the Race to the Top grant for Bill's Child Care Test, but if it was ITQA and they were to select preschool as an age-appropriate level, we would not be able to buy that item. Or we see that it's a crib, so why is it saying preschool? So it's just some quality control pieces that we want to make sure that we check before we push out to approval.
So I've never done this, so we can delete from here? Because what I do is open up the draft and tell them to remove it and then resubmit.
Yes, you can. What you want to do, the only people who have deleting privileges are the navigator of that site. You would open this record, click that, and then up on the right-hand side, there's a menu with a drop-down that says delete.
Okay.
We are unable to delete the whole spending record, so if this was all bad, you just want to change the action to cancel or rejected. But if it's individual things, you can actually change them. If they called you and said, can you please replace it with this item number, you can go in and put that, or you can delete it. Another thing that we do with quality control is try to make sure that all of the goals are matching the items. Here, on the second one, they chose learning environment for their QIP goal, but for the first item, which was crayons, they chose family partnerships. So there's also a way to go in and change your goals, and if we have some time at the end, I can show you how to do that.
These QIP goals that are listed here are hyperlinks within Sugar, so you do want to go into a deeper level than just to see that high standard, that category area that's showing right here, because you're going to see the narrative from the program, just as we looked at with that playground example, because it could be, is this the crayons pulling in, the first one? It could be that they were using the crayons for a family engagement activity, and that would make sense. But if you look at it just on this face value, that's where you're gonna have that question of, I don't know if this is the right goal. But if you go into the detail, you'll really understand the intent of that program.
So we went through and made sure that everything on the record is appropriate, and now we're ready to send it for approval to a grant lead or a grant manager. I know some of you do all the things, so you would be sending it to yourself. You do that by selecting this drop down here, what would you like to do, and it gives you many different options from where you are at that, from where you are on that record. Submit to program manager is what we would select here, which would then change the status to pending pre-approval.
Right, so this is how Elena and I partner a lot in our work as it relates to QI spending. She's much more connected to the provider, to the program on receiving the requests and that TA side. And then in the previous screening, when she sent this to a program manager for approval, that's when I get looped in, unless we've talked about some questions and concerns about the spending record ahead of time. So I wanted to show you what my screen looks like in my role in Sugar. So when this record comes to me, I would get an email alert. I can also locate this record through the list view of spending or a spending report in Sugar. And you'll see that I have some different options in the drop-down than Elena had with her in her role. And you'll notice here, Elena mentioned the status is pending pre-approval. So nothing's final yet. It's getting a second set of eyes on it and just another thorough review so that we haven't missed anything. For those of you that do, as Elena mentioned, send it to yourself for a second approval, I would really encourage you to think about the structure of your staffing at the council to have two distinct sets of eyes on it. I know last year, I think it was sort of April, May, towards the end of the fiscal year, when there's a lot of things coming through, it's really easy to kind of miss some little details to go when it feels really fast and furious. So separating those duties, if you can at all, to have two sets of eyes looking at every record is good quality control. So this is a record here, a screenshot of a record from one of our preferred vendors. So that's a relationship that we've negotiated where we can send a PO directly to them. So that's why this option at the very top gives me, or says pre-approve and send PO email to the vendor. So this second set of eyes on it gives the go-ahead for the items to be ordered. I could send it back to the navigator for correction, and I often do. Elena mentioned some of those ideas, the consumables, the QIP goal. Sometimes I saw one come through a couple weeks ago for $1,200 for walkie-talkies. And so it was a good idea to have enhanced communication. It was related to a health and safety issue, but it seemed really excessive. So a quick search that I did on Amazon found something that was much more accessible in terms of a price. And I suggested that they move in that direction instead. So it varies on why you might send something back for correction, but again, having that second set of eyes allows you to do that. And then I also have the ability to cancel or reject. Any questions about this page? Yes.
What would you use the QI Navigator notes and approval notes for?
Oh, great question. So I often use the approval notes to give some guidance or clarification to my correction.
Which comes into the workflow. So you'll get an email that says your record needs correction, and then when you open that email, it tells you exactly what was wrong with it. So you're not going back into your record trying to figure out what was wrong.
Can you remind me, if you're splitting something, is that often documented in the Navigator notes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Navigator notes I use for many reasons. for example, say I get a request and it's missing a piece of documentation, I would change my action to waiting for provider to respond, which then changes the status to waiting for additional documentation. And then in my navigator notes, I can say, I'm still waiting for the statement for the college, or I need some piece of information that they haven't given me yet. So it's a great way to remind yourself where you're at with your records, especially if you have a lot of them.
So I'm just curious, with this group, how many of you do the approvals? You consider it a grant leave approval? Right. All right, so some final thoughts before, I think we've got a bit of time for playing around in sugar in just a minute, but some final thoughts that we wanted to share with you were that councils are accountable to be fiscally responsible for these funds. So that's why we might have to tell a program or you as a navigator, we're not going to process this request. But as I said, we're very open to new ideas, and it seems like the way Race to the Top has come into our system and Colorado Shines is opening up all kinds of new possibilities for quality improvement. So we do see this as an evolving process. And I just wanted to remind everyone about the support website that ECLA maintains. A great resource, lots of information, webinars, as well as support documents related to QI spending. So if we didn't capture everything today or you have additional questions, you can likely find the information here. And then we do have some time right now where we thought we could go into sugar. You guys can play around a little bit. If it sparks any more questions, Lillian and I can float around and help you with that. Bear with us for just a minute. We are going to try to pull up a Denver sugar record, and then we can go through the steps that a navigator and a grant lead would do, and if you want to follow along in your accounts, you're welcome to do that.
I'm sorry.
We've pulled up a report in sugar. Everyone probably recognizes this page. We went into the reports tab, and it's a report titled All Spending by Funding Stream by Status. And I set some parameters or some filters here to just pull up a couple records from our council that are in received request status. So So I left this funding stream empty, which means it's going to pull all of the different funding streams that Denver has. And then I wanted to start with the received request status. So we've got a few in the queue in Denver, as you can see. Melania's going to click into one of them. Oh, let me see here, some notes in that field. So we're waiting on the QIP goal here to be changed, so that's why it's still in our queue. It hasn't moved forward yet to any of the other steps or approval. So Elizabeth here.
I can show how to change a QIP goal.
Okay.
Does anybody want to learn how to change a QIP goal? Yes. What were you going to ask?
If you could go back up to where it says split question mark. Is that intended for
Yes.
um,
Let me see, where is it?
like
There it
the
is.
invoice?
Yeah. So oftentimes what happens is maybe they have $150 in one account and $25 in another account, and it's going to cost $162. So what you're going to do is you're going to make the one order, the primary order, with the entire amount on it. Through EC Connect, as you know, you can't necessarily submit an order that's more than $10 over. So sometimes they'll have to ask for a navigator's help. If it's in draft status, you can change it to received request on your end. So they can call you and say, it's not submitting, it's over the amount, and you can pull it through knowing that what you're planning on doing is splitting the invoice between two funding streams. So once you get it over, what you would then do is put the amount that this funding stream is going to cover, and then in your navigator notes you would say, splitting this invoice with ITT, QI, and then you're going to add the PO number to the navigator notes so that whoever's doing your finance, when they come in and they say, how come this invoice is more than the record, they can see, oh, I just have to go to this PO and the rest of the information is going to be there. You select yes for your split, and then on your other spending record, you would do the same thing. So the other spending record in the navigator notes would have this PO information on it, and would also say split, and have the balance that was on that invoice. And that should provide enough information for your finance department to figure out, or your finance person, to figure out how to handle that invoice.
I thought you said though it was in draft, is it still in draft form in EC Connect?
Once you change the action
Right.
to receive request, you can move it into receive
So
request.
then how do you get a PO if it's not ordered?
So as soon as it's received request, it creates a PO. So in order to create a second order, you would have to either go into EC Connect on their behalf and make that record, or Bill can tell us what to do.
So a couple things there. One is the fact that each one of these records, if it's an actual record, like if you went to Lakeshore, those go to the vendor. And so you want to have one that is actually going to process. And so what we suggest that you do is that you create one record, and like Melania said, keep it in draft, and then knowing that it's going to be over, and then the QI Navigator will go in and update it to receive request. Then step 2 would be to enter a back-entered record. And it's going to be the exact same record with all the same details and all the same amounts. But the difference is that one's not going to be processed. So there's going to be one that as you go through the steps, it's going to go to the vendor, they're going to process the order, they're going to deliver it. And then there's another one that's just going to be a marker saying, we use some of these funds from this requisition to pay for this order. And so the other important piece of this is that once it goes to the vendor, you're going to need to update both of these records, and you're going to need to update the discount so that the combination of the discounts from both records equals the total of the order. So that means that you only have to pay it for it once, but it's split up between the two.
Can we have like step-by-step instructions on the Echo?
There is,
Well,
there is an article.
step-by-step instructions on the support site for this?
There are.
So there are step-by-steps because it's a lot of different, yeah, it says split in the image. So if you type in split in the search, it will pop up. But this is a lot of steps. There are actually several different ways you can do this. So what Bill is saying is this is probably the cleanest way to do it. You can also do a variety of different things. You can duplicate it and put the specific items you're paying for on a different requisition. You can actually just have the provider do 2 separate requests if it's distinct enough. You could do that. So there are a lot of different avenues to do this, and there is documentation on it. But if you have a specific example of one and you would like a support person to walk you through it, send them an email, and they will actually help you do it for real with a real record, and that will probably help you get it solidified.
But isn't this great that we have a system that allows us to not leave money on the table?
One last thing about that, I would strongly recommend if it's like a big order with 10 different items and you can't afford it on one requisition, split that up into 2 orders. So like 5 on one requisition and 5 on the other, and that way you save a whole bunch of administrative headache.
That also helps your EC Connect system reflect what they actually have to spend while you're trying to get the order processed. Because we've had providers overspend, not realizing that once they split the order, when we haven't gotten it paid into the system yet, that money doesn't draw down from that EC account until you get the sugar records finalized. So
Correct. So it's going to be fuzzy, and you're going to get negative requisition alerts, and it's it's a tough problem to solve.
Someday we hope to be able to use more than one requisition within EC Connect. And Bill always cringes when I say that, but someday we'll do it.
Okay, and we're going to show you how to switch a goal.
She had a question.
Yes.
Oh, so if they wanted, let's say they wanted to buy something that cost $500, but they only had $50, can they use that $500, that's in their spending, and then pay the other $50 themselves? Is there some way to do that?
So what we try to do is ask them to pay for that and request reimbursement on the amount. We do make exceptions on that, but we prefer that they ask us for what they have available rather than trying to track down a check from them. Because otherwise what would happen is we would pay for the entire amount and ask them to send us a check for the balance.
But so would they still get, like if they were to get that 18% discount if they did that? So if they went, is the Kaplan or Lakeshore that gives the 18% discount, but they're ordering outside the system, they wouldn't still get that discount, would they?
Well, no, the vendors have agreed to honor that in that kind of scenario. So you might need to help them. Like if the provider is trying to do that and the vendor is giving them a hard time, then the navigator or someone needs to call that vendor and say you need to honor this. But they should be honoring them.
So there's no goals here. Can you tell me what
Because I'm a lazy teacher.
So, I'm going to do one more.
Like we used to do in high school.
So if we wanted to change this goal, I'd like to use my side, my tabs, right click and open additional tabs so that I have access to more than one tab at a time. So right here, we want to change this goal, DCP3. First, let's look at it. So for some reason, we've decided that this goal does not apply to our purchase. So what we do is we go and find the goal that we think is a better goal by going to the record itself and going all the way down to QIP goals, which you can reorder all of these subpanels. So if we think that this one would be better, which actually looks like a duplicate of the first one, what I do is I then copy this information here. And then go back to the spending request, find the detail that has the wrong goal and open it. Then I go to the goal here and I paste that in. It happens to be the same one. Then you want to click this, because if you just entered that and then you close, it wouldn't save it. So you want to click the appropriate goal that matches the information you just put in. And then click save. And your goal will be changed. Any questions about that? Yes?
Well, you mentioned earlier that you can go through and just delete a single item on the request. How do you do that?
That would be here.
You don't own the spending record?
I don't own the spending record. I might own this one. Let me see if I own this one.
Which is good, so it's a protection.
Oh,
So
and then
if you're a
Kelly.
different navigator and you're trying to do this, maybe by accident, then you won't be able to delete it. It's only available to the person who's assigned to that spending record.
And it would be right here. In the record, in the detail itself, same place where I put the goal, you click this little side button and it'll say delete. Yes.
Could you also do it from, let's say they put in a request and you're trying to make an edit to that, like go into their request, and before you submit it to whoever's gonna do an approval for it, like the last approval, then you can unlink like certain items from that request?
It's probably better to delete them rather than unlink them, because then they just kind of sit around in cyberspace somewhere. Then they're not clouding up the storage space, I guess. You don't use unlink, do you, for anything?
Generally speaking, it sort of depends on what you're trying to do, but in this circumstance, you don't want to unlink, you want to delete it, unless you're trying to put it on a different requisition, which that's a really manual way of doing it, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. And if you do unlink it, then we run a whole bunch of quality control reports periodically, so eventually those would probably get deleted anyways because they're not linked. But it would be better if you just delete it, if you really are done with it.
I think it is great conversations to have and great questions that are coming up, because I know with QIP goals, there's always, it's constantly evolving, and when working with providers, even with writing a QIP goal, sometimes they're just like, I don't know how to write an appropriate QIP goal. So I think, I really appreciate this session, and I think it's review, but it's also really insightful, so thank you guys. These questions are great.
Somebody earlier had mentioned asking about splitting between invoices rather than between funding streams. What would you recommend for, so if there's a large order and they ship part of it, there's something back ordered, how do you track both invoices?
So you can copy a spending record. What you would do is you come here, you see how it says copy? If you click that, which this is not my record, so if I do that, I don't know what happens. Let me see if I can find, let me get Bill again. Bill's spending, Bill's test. Okay, so I could copy this, and I create the exact duplicate of that same spending record with the same PO. There's nothing to identify it as different. But I want to change the requisition. Bill doesn't have any other requisitions right now, but if he did, I would put in ITQA, and that requisition would pop up right here in that field. I would save that, And then it would have a new requisition with the same PO. So I would then want to regenerate the PO. And you click regenerate PO, click regenerate PO again, generate a new PO and save. And then this PO will change to the appropriate funding stream. So instead of saying RTT, it would say ITQA. And then you could go into them and add a spending detail. Right now it doesn't have any. When you copy a record, it does not copy all of the spending details. You would then have to add a spending detail. So this is doing it from the sugar side. What you can also do is make that draft. It says received request, and then you can go into EC Connect, which might be easier. If we made this draft, because now it doesn't have any spending details, we kept it as draft. And go into EC Connect and add all those additional pieces of information. Then that way you can have two records.
Bill, could you demonstrate the backorder process? Because were you asking about if you have an invoice and it's $1,000 and only 800 of it ships, so you want to pay $800 and you need to separate your 800 and your $200,
Yeah.
let's say. Could you demonstrate backordering?
Alright. Cool, so this. You just need to find a spending record of mine that has spending details first. That doesn't sound right.
So the backorder you can use for a variety of different things. Like if you have some items that are drop shipped versus shipped directly from the vendor and you get different invoices, this can be useful for that. Or if you have items canceled, you'll need to be able to cancel particular items. In that case, you would just remove them entirely. If they are just literally backordered and someday they will ship, then you can move that forward. But it's important at the end of the fiscal year, if you have something that's been backordered and will not ship before June 30th, you need to just cancel that item. And when you do that, you actually have to officially say that to the vendor. Sugar will not communicate that for you.